13 of chapter number 25, continuing our Wednesday night Bible study. I thought we'd jump in there and finish out chapter 25 this evening, and that way we'll be ready and poised to go. We're almost through the book. We got 2 more chapters, I believe it is, and then we'll have went through the whole book of Acts. It's been a blessing seeing how all this ties together. And now when you hear other preaching, you'll realize how it all fits. Hopefully it'll come back to our remembrance and we can see, hey, I remember where this ties in the book of Acts with Paul and how God used him and the different things that went on there. But in the book of Acts, chapter number 25, we'll start reading in verse number 13 and read to the end of the chapter. And after certain days, King Agrippa and Bernice, now I've been saying that Bernice, but I listened to a professional Bible reader and he said it was Bernice. But it is a female, so we'll go with Bernice. Came unto Caesarea to salute Festus. And when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king, saying, there is a certain man left in bonds by Felix. Now, if you remember the story, Felix left him. Now there's a new governor. His name is Festus. And we see Paul's case is being brought before this king that's coming by. And verse number 15, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priest and the elders of the Jews informed me, desiring to have judgment against him. To whom I answered, it is not the manner of the Romans to deliver any man to die, before that he which is accused have the accusers face to face, and to have license to answer for himself concerning the crime laid against him. Therefore, when they were come hither, without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought forth. And against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought none accusations of such things as I supposed, but had certain questions against him of their own superstitions and of one Jesus, which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked him whether he would go to Jerusalem and there be judged of these matters. Now, just so you know, they've tried to kill him twice in Jerusalem, and they've already got a plot to kill him again. But Paul decided he's not going there. He's going to be judged by Augustus or by Caesar. So verse 21, but when Paul had appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. But here's the problem. He has no formal charges to send with him. He's going to send the man to be judged, but he don't have the charges that he can send, and he's trying to figure out how to handle this. So verse number 22, then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, thou shalt hear him. And on the morrow, when Agrippa was come, and Bernice, with great pomp, and was entered into the place of the hearing, where the chief captains and the principal men of the city, at Festus' commandment, Paul was brought forth. And Festus said, King Agrippa. Now here we're going to get the play. This is how he's presented it from his viewpoint. He said, and Festus said, King Agrippa, and all men which are here present with us, ye see this man, about whom all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both at Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself hath appealed to Augustus, I have determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord, wherefore I have brought him forth before you, and especially before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination I might have somewhat to write. For it seemeth to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal to signify of the crimes laid against him. So we'll stop reading there, and that concludes chapter 26. Let's go back and look at what's happening. Well, we see this visit from this king. Basically, what's happening is this king is coming into town to check on the new governor. We're having a bunch of politicians. They're getting together and they're having, a pat on the back session. Well, I see you're the new governor here, and I see that you're going to be, answering to me, of course, because I'm the king of the area. So basically, the passing of time in verse number 13 is what's going on. After certain days, King Agrippa shows up, and Bernice is with him, and they came to Caesarea to salute Festus. So they're going and patting him on the back. Well, we're glad you're the governor. We're glad you won the election. Or we're glad you got selected to be the new governor. Now, I don't know. Maybe you know more about politics than I do, but what do politicians discuss? I wonder. And I got to thinking about this, and it's kind of like our government today. Who in here knows how the government has money? How does the government have money? What? Tax. You're exactly right. The government has no money unless they take it from its citizens. So I got to thinking, I wonder if the King Agrippa and Festus are sitting around saying, we could do a little more revenue raising. In other words, we could give ourselves a raise if we can just figure out how. So I wonder, Miss Fay, I wonder if they were sitting around the table twiddling thumbs, looking across at each other. We ought to charge them for tying their horses up. We can charge a penny per tie-off. You think that's far-fetched? How many of you remember parking meters where you used to have to put the little coin in and turn it and it would start timing down? And if you wasn't out there, somebody put a ticket on your car. What do you think that's doing? That's generating revenue. That's keeping the politicians rich, keeping the people bleeding. So I wonder during this passing of time, because it said they were together for many days, and then I guess they kind of run out of things to talk about, but they were finding more ways to tax people, I'm sure. Or here's the other thing that government does. They create a problem, and then they create a solution. It's amazing that we can't do anything without a permit in Colorado. This hunting thing has got my mind so confused, I'll never be able to figure this out. If it wasn't for Dave, I wouldn't even know how to get a license. But I mean, we move here and they say, well, you got to be there at least 6 months. I think that was the rule before you can hunt. And then when you're here 6 months, you have to put in for the draw. I come to find out, I moved to a state where they gamble everything. It's a gamble to get to go hunting. And you got to have points, and you got to be in the lottery, and then lo and behold, you got to sit at a computer and try to hit enter until you get selected. I thought, my goodness, this is crazy. But welcome to Colorado. That's what we do. And I'm sure behind all of that is some politicians getting rich, because it's expensive to live here. It's expensive to hunt here. And the politicians are always finding ways to fix things. And if they don't fix things, then they fix each other's problems. I got this problem, and his name's Paul, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with him. Can you help me out? That's basically what they do. I'll tell you what, I'll help you. I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine. And that's how water gets bought, and that's how things get done, and that's where the EPA makes it illegal for you to burn your trash out in your yard, or anything, just all the government stuff. This is what happens when politicians get together. So we have the king coming in to congratulate the governor, and I dare to say he's probably saying, hey, now listen, last year they didn't net but about 100,000. So this year I'm hoping you'll do a little better than that. I need at least 110,000 from you, Festus. Figure out how this is going to work. But anyway, we see in verse 13, the politicians, they get together. In verses 14 through 21, they start deciding on how they're going to help each other. Now, he's already mentioned about Paul, and when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's case unto the king, saying, there's a certain man left in bonds by Felix. Hey, look, I didn't want this problem, but the former administration has left this for me to deal with. Does that sound familiar? What's Trump doing right now? Fixing everything that was done in the prior administration. If we're not too careful about it, we'll get to thinking that, it's a wonder we even survived that last administration. And we'll make him out to be our knight in shining armor. But the problem with Trump is he can't keep his mouth shut long enough. He makes everybody mad. Which it don't bother me none. If you're going to go in there like a lion. You can't do no more damage than what they have already done most of the time. But we see the politicians get together, and perhaps you can help me. You see, I have this situation. Felix left me. Maybe that was the Democrat side of things. But we see later on, he goes on to explain what the problem is. And it's amazing when you get to listening to how he portrays it. Festus, he portrayed it as he's such a knight in shining armor himself. He took and he listened to Paul's case, and he followed the law to the T. Remember, Paul should have been released a long time ago. He's been stuck in prison over 2 years now and don't even have any charges laid against him. And you think you've been mistreated. It's a sad thing when a man is falsely accused and condemned and does time. But Paul is not really arguing the fact that he's been there. Paul's just saying, no, you're not sending me to Jerusalem where they're going to kill me. Paul's made that plea to him. And this is how Festus viewed the whole case. In verse number 18, he said, against whom when the accuser stood up, they brought none accusations of such things as I supposed, but had certain questions against him of their own superstitions. See, this is what a non-religious man looks like. He don't think the Jews have any grounds to stand on. To him, they're just worried about their superstitious beliefs. He don't understand it. He knows nothing about the Jewish culture. He don't understand the things of the Bible, the Word of God, or any of that. He's just saying they got these superstitious things, and they were accusing this man of it. And then not only that, there's a man named Jesus that's dead that Paul says is alive. You see the disregard for anything holy in government? He didn't want it. He didn't know anything about it. And he says these superstitions, he's broken them or something. And someone named Jesus, they got issues with that. And there's a lot of people in the world has issues with Jesus. It's amazing. You can have good morals and you can talk and, help people out and do good things, and everybody's all right with that. But when you start talking about Jesus, the Son of God, it's amazing how quickly people get upset with you. Well, I don't know Jesus had anything to do with it. I just felt burdened to do it, and I'm just being a good moral person. Yeah, when you bring Jesus' name up, people get upset about it. So we learned through all this that Festus is trying to figure out what to do with him. And he pleaded to Paul, and he asked Paul, he said, do you want to go to Jerusalem and be judged from your peers, from those that you're associated with? And Paul has determined that he's going to go to Rome to be judged. Now, if you've been with us through the Bible study, you realize that God has already said that Paul's going to stand before kings. He's getting ready to. I told you, whatever God says is going to happen, there's no stopping it. You may say, Well, I'm not going to do that. But if God says you're going to do that, guess what? You're going to do that. And the circumstances lets us feel like we have some say in it, but we don't really. God can move it around to where exactly what he says happens is going to happen. So he says, so I've agreed with Paul, and I'm going to send him to Jerusalem. Or no, I'm not going to send him to Jerusalem because he has appealed to Caesar. And now Paul is laying his life on the line in a big way. He's appealing to Caesar, and whatever happens there is going to be the end of the road for him. But we know he's got to be in Rome. So we know this is still all in God's plan. He's asked to go before Caesar, and Festus is telling Agrippa, he said, and I'm going to send him because that's what he said he wants. Verse 22, he goes on to say, then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, thou shalt hear him. What is it that's got Agrippa's attention? He wants to know more about Paul because he is acquainted with the Jewish customs. He does understand the Jewish way of life. He does understand that there's a Messiah that's supposed to come. He does understand the custom of the Jews. And he's intrigued to hear what Paul's got to say. Because remember the statement that he said, well, we hadn't got to it yet, but Paul has got the Jews so tore up. 2 years plus have passed, and they're still trying to kill him. That's how much they hate him. And that's how much religion hates salvation. You see, salvation is in the man Christ Jesus. Religion is in your works and your abilities, which you can't work your way into heaven. You see, religion gives you a set of rules to follow, but salvation sets you free to follow Him. And they don't go together in no way, shape, or form. So let's look at verse number 23. So the king is going to hear Paul, the prisoner. And it's amazing. You know, the king's going to come and hear. So could you imagine a big parade coming down Main Street? And they come by out there where Lois's car's sitting, and the parade stops right in front of the church. And we see the king and his lady is with him. They're all dressed up. They've got on their royal robes and their clothing, and they've got all the captains of the army with them. They've got all this entourage, and they make this big scene to come in. As I was reading that, I couldn't help but to think, what was that when they installed the president? How many of you watched that with Trump? That was a big, huge event. Guess who pays for all that? So I guess when you're in politics, you can have a big, huge parade because there ain't no skin off your back. So we see the big pomp and all this stuff. They come rolling in to where they're going to judge Paul or where he's going to hear Paul plead his case. And it is amazing how things hadn't changed much. You know, I don't think President Trump wants to roll in nowhere without Air Force One, a big motorcade. You know, they want to have all the dignitaries there, all the important people. What's amazing to me is all of this is coming to see who? Paul. Poor old preacher Paul. They're all coming to see him. So we see in verses 23 through 27, Felix does his part, and Festus does his part, and he starts talking about what all has happened. With in verse 24, and Festus said, King Agrippa. He addresses him, King Agrippa, and all the men that are here, the captains, we greet you, you know, puts on a big opening speech for him. And then he tells him what the case is all about. And he said, all men which are here present with us, ye see this man about whom all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both at Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. They brought Paul out in verse 23. Can you imagine what Paul thought when he come out? And I'm sure he's probably cuffed. He's probably shackled. He may have had to hop out, maybe behind his back, however it was. But can you imagine as Paul came out on there and he sees a king and all this entourage? Can you imagine what went through Paul's mind? He's been under house arrest. He's been in. I'm sure they put cuffs on him to make it look, all legit, like he's a prisoner. But Paul's had freedom the whole time he's been there. He's been under house arrest. People could come in and out and visit with him. But Paul comes in, he comes through the door, and there's all this pomp and circumstance, all this rich people, all the king's there, the queen's there, and the governor's there. And I wonder if Paul's just thinking, wow, I wonder what all these is here for me for. But I think in the back of his mind, Paul knew what God had said. Paul said, you're going to be a witness to me before kings. And I wonder if Paul just said, wow, Lord, there's a king here. King Agrippa. And I believe Paul knew him. Maybe through the schooling, maybe through life or whatever. But I'm pretty sure he knows who King Agrippa is. We'll find out in the next chapter how it unfolds. But we see that Paul is brought out, the prisoner, and there sits a king. The prisoner is brought out, and then the background is given on this prisoner. Festus tells all about him. Paul has stirred up them Jews. The Jews hate him so bad, they want to kill him and they want to rip him apart. He said, I was going to let him go, but I can't, because if I let him go, they're going to kill him. And he himself has asked to go see Caesar. So I can't do anything now, but I don't want to send him, King Agrippa, without charges. And I believe Festus was appealing to the pride in the king. And I'm sure the king in his mind is thinking, well, I'll help out Festus. This is a small matter. I can come up with some kind of a charge for him. And as they discuss this and as all this is brought forth, but when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, he himself hath appealed to Augusta. And I have determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord. In other words, he's saying, King Agrippa, I need to find something to blame him with. Is he blameworthy or not? He says, King, help me to have something to charge him with. Now, it's bad when people hate you bad enough that they're going to have to make up something. We've already seen the Jews have attempted this several times. They're trying to make up a reason so they can kill him. That's pure hate right there. As we think about this situation with Paul, and he's in there and he's getting ready, the next chapter he's actually going to get to defend himself. Now, how many of you remember how he's defended himself in the previous chapters? What did he do? Anybody? He was a Roman citizen. That was one thing he brought up. What else did he say? The Sanhedrin, all that's true. But what was his main defense? What would he tell them when they would bring him out and accuse him? What would he do? No, he didn't admit to nothing. He didn't plead the fifth. He didn't keep quiet. I'll tell you one thing, you'd be hard-pressed to get a preacher to stay quiet. What did he do, Cat? He gave them his testimony. He said, I was traveling one day on my high horse, and I was headed to persecute them Christians, those that are of that way. Remember, that's all he ever did was just tell what happened to him. And what's the best thing that you can do as a defense to people of who you are and why you're different? The best thing we can ever do is just give them our testimony and say, listen, I was a sinner. God stepped into my path. I had a run-in with God, and I decided, and I listened to what God had said. I was going to go to hell because I was a sinner and I was guilty. And now I've met Jesus. I'm saved. I'm putting my faith in Him. That's all He ever did was give a testimony. So what do you think the next chapter is going to reveal? What's Paul going to do when he stands before the king, King Agrippa? He's going to give him his testimony. I hate to steal the thunder, so I don't know what I'm going to preach next week when we look at this, but that's exactly what's going to happen. He's going to stand before King Agrippa. And does anybody know what King Agrippa is going to tell him? What's he going to tell him, Dalen? Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. We might just skip that chapter now, because I done took all the thunder out of it. But Paul is going to give his testimony before the king, and the king is going to hear it, and the king is going to he's going to feel it. He's going to know that Paul is genuine. He's going to know that Paul's life backs up what he's saying with his mouth, and he's going to be moved, and he's going to say, almost, Paul, you have persuaded me to be a Christian. Do you know what almost means? It means you didn't make it. If you almost win a race, guess what? You didn't win. If you almost hit the target, what does that mean? You missed the target. If you almost get into heaven, where are you living at? You see, almost don't count. I'm not almost saved. I am saved. You say, how can you know you're saved? Because the Bible teaches us how we can know. Over there in the 1 John, I think it's 1 John, it says that you can know that you've passed from death unto life. How can you know? What is some evidences of a person that's been born again? They'll act different. Yeah, that's one thing. What's some other? How can you see that a person is a Christian? How can you see it in their life? There'll be some fruit somewhere, right? You know, fruit's external. It hangs on the outside of the tree. These undercover Christians, I got issues with them. But external, you'll see some changes. I am not the same man that I was before I got saved. Before I got saved, I didn't have much patience with nothing. And I don't want no more patience. I'm not going to pray for patience. But now that I've been saved, I have the ability to love people that I couldn't love before. I have the ability to see the love that God has shown me. I have the ability to see how God has forgiven me of so much. So why can I not forgive someone else? You see, there's some things about being a Christian. Your life will change. You won't be the same. And Paul, I don't know what I'm going to do with chapter 27 now, but I guess we could just read some highlights of it. Paul's defense before King Agrippa. Let's look at chapter 26 for just a little bit. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, he's going to let him speak. Now, this is amazing to me. Paul has been led out into this big, huge auditorium with all these people, and Paul has not said a word. Why is that? Because Paul realizes you don't speak until someone speaks to you or gives you permission to speak. Man, wouldn't it be a blessing if people could just have that much respect now? Not to speak until you've been asked to speak. I can remember some parents used to do their children like that. Mama and Daddy, they didn't want to hear them youngins talking unless they asked them to. You know, now we've got so tender with our kids. Oh, we're just worried about them eating. Oh, come on, you got to eat, you got to eat, you got to eat. And then when they start eating, you wonder like, oh my God, how am I going to feed them? And ain't it amazing? Come on, say daddy, say daddy, say daddy. Say mama, say mama. Say something. And then once they start talking, what do we spend the rest of our life doing? Will you be quiet? Would you please quit talking? You talk too much. It's funny how we do things. But then King Agrippa said unto Paul, thou art permitted to speak for thyself. Then Paul stretched forth his hand and answered for himself. I like it. I don't like preachers that just stand like this and they talk like this. I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because I shall answer for myself this day before thee, touching all things whereof I am accused of the Jews. No, that ain't how Paul did it. Paul, I don't know if they've took the cuffs off of him or they've unshackled him. But what's the first thing Paul does? He stretched forth his hand. He said, King, I am so happy. I make myself happy. I think myself happy. I'm the prisoner here, so to speak. But hey, I'm happy, King, to give you an answer. I'm happy to let you know why I'm in this situation. He goes on to say, I shall answer for myself this day before thee, touching all the things whereof I am accused of the Jews, especially because I know thee, King. You're expert in all the customs. You understand this stuff. And King, I'm happy to explain it to you because I know with your education, you're going to understand this. You're going to get it. He goes on to say, verse 3 or verse 4, my manner of life from my youth, which was at the first among mine own nation at Jerusalem, know all the Jews, all these that are accusing me. I grew up with them. They know who I am and they know what I believed. I was one of them, basically, is what he's telling them, which knew me from the beginning. If they would testify that after the most straightest sect of our religion, I lived a Pharisee, and now I stand and am a judge for the hope of the promise made of God unto our fathers, unto which promise our 12 tribes. Remember, we were talking about that this morning in Sunday school about the tribes. Here they are being mentioned. Imagine that. He goes on to say, where am I at? What verse was I in? I done lost my place. 7. The promise of our 12 tribes, instantly serving God day and night, hope to come, for which hope's sake, King Agrippa, I am accused of the Jews. Why should it be thought a thing incredible with you that God should raise the dead? In other words, he's pushing the king. He's king, you know what we believe, and you know that it's been taught, and you know that the scriptures and all the prophets for before time said there's someone coming. He said, King, I know that you know about this stuff. Verse 9, I verily thought with myself that I ought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. In other words, remember, he was going to kill the church people. He was going to persecute those that spoke the name of Jesus, that he was the Messiah. Which thing I also did in Jerusalem, and many of the saints did I shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priests. And when they were put to death, I gave my voice against them. Whose coat did he hold while they stoned the man to death? The first martyr of the church. Who was the first martyr of the church? Stephen. Who was holding the coat of the men throwing all the rocks? No. Saul. Remember, something happened. His name was Saul back then. But then when he got saved, born again, when he met Jesus, changed his name to Paul. Got you on that one. That's a trick question. He said, and I punished them often in every synagogue and compelled them to blaspheme. And being exceedingly mad against them, I persecuted them even unto strange cities. In other words, Paul would hold them captive. And he said, you renounce Jesus. Don't you talk about him. He's not the Messiah. And if you renounce him, I'll let you live. That's what Paul did. But they would not renounce that name. They would give their life for what they believed. Whereupon, as I went to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priest, at midday, O king, I saw in the way a light from heaven. Does this sound familiar? What is he doing? He's just testifying. You don't have to tell somebody some extravagant story. Just tell them, you know what sharing the gospel is and being a witness is? It's one beggar that found bread telling another beggar where they can find bread. If you found help at the cross of Jesus Christ, All you got to do is share that with somebody else and share that with them where you got help. If you know somebody's life's falling apart, you can go to them and say, I was once where you were at. My life was falling apart, but I found help in Jesus. Paul's doing his best to tell this king. And when we were all fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking unto me, saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And I said, Who art thou, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. But rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things which I will appear unto thee, delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom now I send thee, to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sin and an inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. Can you imagine that? In verse number 19. Whereupon, O King Agrippa, I was not disobedient unto the heavenly vision. In other words, he says, King, when he stepped into my path, I've obeyed everything he wanted me to do. I've not changed. I've not wavered. I've not veered to the left or to the right. But King Agrippa, I have done everything I can to make that vision come to pass. But showed, in verse number 20, but showed first unto them of Damascus. Now he's giving the report how it all took place. Remember, he went to Damascus and at Jerusalem and then throughout all the coast of Judea, and then to the Gentiles, that they should repent and turn to God and do works meet for repentance. For these causes the Jews caught me in the temple and went about to kill me. And I'm going to stop there because I don't want us to go through the whole chapter. But basically, Paul's just giving them the testimony. My name used to be Saul. I met Jesus. My name's been changed to Paul. I used to be just like them folk. I used to be just like them. And I hated the church and I hated Christians. But then I had an encounter with God. And now I'm serving Him. The visit from Agrippa has another whole scene for Paul to be used. And if this would have been me, I would have been so tore up and upset. Why am I being held without bond? Why am I still being held and I ain't even been charged? I'd be under the juniper tree whining and crying. Why am I having to suffer all this for Jesus? I remember when I got locked up for preaching and I wasn't preaching. They took me away from a group of kids that I was responsible for and locked me up. And I was wrestling with the call to preach at that time. I was struggling with whether or not to just give my life to Him and let Him do with me whatever He could. Never thought He'd do much with me. I definitely never thought He'd move me to Colorado to be a part of a church plant. But as I was being cuffed and stuffed into the police car, it did run through my mind, Miss Tammy, as that hurts. I don't know if you've ever been locked up, but when they handcuff you and then sit you in the back of a police car, son, don't never trust me on this one. It ain't comfortable when your hands is behind your back and then they sit you down in there and now they got to keep you safe, so they strap you in there. But that was uncomfortable. Miss Nina, I was sitting there thinking, Lord, this is a funny way to make me want to preach, because this ain't looking too good right now. And that was after the cop tried to drag me to the cop car. Yeah. I questioned, Lord, you have some very unique ways of making this appealing to someone. But I'm so thankful that God knew exactly what He was doing. And I'm so thankful that things turned out the way they were. As we were in the jail and passing out tracts, I said, there's still joy in serving the Lord, even behind bars. Since that time, I've went and preached in many prisons to give inmates hope because they feel like they have none. to tell them the same thing Paul did, just to testify how good God is. And there's been a lot of people in prisons come to know the Lord and get out and then go and serve. What a blessing it is. That's all I have for you this evening. Has anybody got anything you want to make a comment on as far as the study of